Okay. All right, so we made it just a few minutes late. So I'm very excited for our second WebEx session. And if you all read my email, you'll know the procedure for today is to raise your hand if you want to speak, if you have a question or you want to speak. Natalie, if you can clear your little check mark again, that would be good. See if, there, I did it for you. It's a, okay. All right, so I'm getting used to this platform as well, everyone, so bear with me as I stumble along together. A couple of announcements. I did put an announcement up on the Canvas site for everyone regarding a special session that I'm going to do on Thursday at 1 o'clock, a 1-hour workshop just to help you with your critical assignment on genocide. And there will be extra credit if you attend that session. And if not, it'll be recorded and you can listen to it following that recording. Okay. All right, so let's get started on today's topic. Very, very excited. I did post a new class notes set for today. I did include some new slides that I wanted you to have and chose a different video for today's session. So let's get started, okay? The topic today is language diversity and, of course, communication in general, linguistic imperialism, discrimination, Anglocentrism, and teaching. Okay. And Ashley, can you see the whiteboard as well as the interpreter? Yes, okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, I picked a couple of quotes that I particularly like that are very relevant to this topic. And the first one is by Thomas Mann. Thomas Mann, a very important educating philosopher, said, was talking about communication and language. And he said, I'm getting a little feedback right now. Hang on a second, don't interpret this. Do I have a tech person online? Donnell, I'm getting a little bit of a feedback in my microphone. Donnell, do you hear that? Not sure what caused it, but sounds good on your end? Okay, I'm just hearing myself reverberate a little bit. Okay. Okay, so Thomas Mann said, speech is civilization itself. The word, even the most contradictory word, preserves contact. It is silence which isolates. I thought that was a very interesting way to look at communication and the importance of hearing, particularly in oral communication and communication in general. And I'm going to ask if anybody would like to comment on this quote, maybe reflect on something. in regard to this comment, in regard to this quote? Just raise your hand if you would like to do that. No one? Okay. Well, let's just go on then. A couple of critical questions to guide our conversation and our presentation today is trying to get a handle, trying to understand the relationship between language and culture. It is a very deep, important connection when we talk about the function of language and communication and how it actually preserves a culture, transmits culture, and is reflective of the culture. Language is supposed to connect people together, put ideas from one mind to another mind. The modality in which we transmit those ideas from one to the other is the language. And we start to see that in a society that places a very high value on what that communication system is, when others do not speak that language, for example, have alternate ways of communicating, there is a very strong potential for isolation of the people who in this case don't speak English in the traditional way. So I'm going to hopefully give you a feeling of how vital language and communication is to all cultures, and in this particular case, the U.S. culture. Even when we talk about, or even when we describe the macroculture of this society, we often refer to it as being white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. And the Anglo-Saxon part of that refers to the language of the culture. Anglo means English, very much like Hispanic means Spanish speakers. Anglos are English speakers. And we will be talking about traditional English speakers in this country and the diversity of the ways people speak English and the diversity of other languages that are also used in this country. And the treatment and the opportunities that are afforded people who speak these different languages and communicate in these different ways. So when I was thinking about this a long time ago, I came up with this correlation. I felt that, well, let me back up and say it this way. Many people have heard the United States being referred to as the melting pot, right? Everybody's heard the United States called the melting pot. And usually that refers to our diversity, our different ethnic cultures in this country. But I see the melting pot of this culture in terms of language. American English is really where the diverse languages melt together and become American English. So, for example, one of the, when cultures or ethnic groups come to this country from nations that have different languages than English, they bring with them words and culture. And sometimes those words and culture becomes infused into the English language. So for example, when somebody sneezes, it's not uncommon to hear people say, Gesundheit. Now, Gesundheit is not an English word. It comes from German. It means good health. And that's an example of a word that has become part of the American English dialect, the American English verbiage, that really has a non-English origin. It's just one example of many, many. Okay? So let me move on to another quote here. And this one is by Rita Mae Brown. And Rita Mae Brown said, "Language is the roadmap of a culture. It tells where its people come from and where they are going." So I'd like you to think about this and raise your hand if you would like to share your reflection on what Rita Mae Brown is saying. No one? You all see the little hand if you wanted to raise your hand, right? Okay. Okay. Well, then let me tell you why I put this particular quote in here. I wanted to give you the sense of how vital, how crucial, how important a language is in transmitting or propelling a culture forward. It is through the language system that connects the people from their history, their past, through the present, through now, and talks about going into the future. So language is almost like the timeline that transmits the cultural values through time, from the past to the present to the future. Without a system of language, what do you think would happen to the culture or to the people who speak, the people who belong to that culture? What do you think would happen to the people if suddenly the language was eradicated or died, in essence? What do you think would happen to the people? Please raise your hand if you'd like to respond. No one? Would you like me to call on people, or what do you think would happen to the people if suddenly they had no language with which to communicate? Joe? Oh, I'm sorry. Shawnee had her hand up. I didn't see it in time. All right. Let's go to Joe first, and then Shawnee. You need to click your mic on for us, Joe, please. I could do that for you. Okay. Your mic is active now.
It's active now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I guess my thought is when you lose communication, you lose the nuance of the culture. And the culture itself, everything about it crumbles. And I kind of see that happening a little bit now just with, I remember how my grandparents would write these beautiful, lengthy letters. And even the movies of like the 20s and 30s where there's just so much language. And I mean, they're just talking so rapidly to now where the language is very minimal to now where we're actually texting. So we're less personal with each other for sure.
Okay. Thank you. So you see that without the language that the culture would crumble. It would fall away, basically. And Sharni, would you like to weigh in? All right, I just activated your mic for you, Sharni.
Via text, people are losing face value of each other, and like they'd rather speak behind a computer. People are afraid to communicate, or yeah, pretty much what she said.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Sharni, if you can you lower your hand? And Joe, can you do that, or should I do that? Let me see. Okay, I was able to do that. Okay. So let me pause for a second here and just point out there is an attendee in the session with the same last name as me, Andrea Allgood. Andrea Allgood, I'm not sure if she has mic capabilities or not. Doesn't seem that she's on a computer. But Andrea is my daughter. And Andrea is what I would consider a polyglot. And I'm going to, does anybody know what a polyglot is? I can hear somebody's mic on. I don't know who it is, but Andrea, I think you might have some, wait, Sharni, let me close your mic, Sharni. Okay. Anybody know what a polyglot is? No? A polyglot is a person who speaks many, many languages or has knowledge of many, many languages. And I'm very excited that my daughter, Dr. Andrea Allgood, can join us today because language is one of her specialty areas. In fact, Andrea has been tutoring me in ASL. So the little that I know of ASL has been thanks to my daughter and watching many, many videos. But I know my ASL is very sloppy. And it's hard to use because I don't want to be misunderstood by anyone. And that gets me back to what I was saying before about communication. One of the essential things about communication in language is transmitting ideas and being understood. So I want you to think about how it feels when you personally don't understand what other people are saying around you. You don't really understand them even though they are talking and speaking to you. Perhaps it's because they're speaking in a different language. So how many of you ladies, I know this Brandon doesn't apply to you, but how many of you ladies hi there. How many of you ladies have ever gone to a nail salon and had your nails done by someone whose language or who was speaking maybe Vietnamese or Korean? What is the feeling that you get when you're sitting in that chair and the people around you are speaking in Vietnamese? What does that make you feel? What does that make you think when you don't understand the people speaking around you? Okay, I see some checks there. Are those, Ashley, did you want to say something? Okay, I see Sarah has a hand up. Okay, takes me a minute to get used to it. Sarah, did you want to respond to that? I'll turn your mic on for you, Sarah. It's now active.
Oh, okay. I was trying to turn it on, but it wouldn't let me. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm being really quiet. I'm in the library right now. But yeah, I've been in that situation many times, and I do feel, I can't help but feel like they're talking about me. I don't know why, they probably aren't, but that's just how I feel, and I'm just very highly curious as to what they're saying.
Okay, thank you for your honesty and candor. And I'm sure every one of us who has been in that situation has felt exactly that same thing. The feeling that they're talking about you or me, and you wish you understood what they were saying so you can be sure. So you can be sure that they weren't saying bad things about you. That's a type of paranoia. It's a fear of not understanding. And it's a very isolating feeling. It makes you feel alone. It makes you feel like other people might be doing things or saying things that are bad about you, and you don't have a lot of control of the situation. That's what it feels like when people come to this country with different languages and everyone around them is speaking English to them, or someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, and everyone around them is hearing and speaking and hearing each other. It's that isolated feeling that you get from the communication being only one way or not happening at all. As teachers, it's our main job to make sure that students are receiving information, that information is being communicated effectively and fairly, regardless of what their first language might be. People whose first language is English and people who can hear have a huge advantage in school over people who don't have English as their first language. The challenges, therefore, are to help and accommodate students by providing the best communication that you can for each and every student. Okay, so let me advance to the next slide. Just having, there it is. Okay. So some more questions for us to chew on, to think about. How do we learn? How do we acquire our first language? Let's start with that one. When do we start learning language? When do we start learning to communicate? When do we first start learning to speak? Anyone want to take a guess as to when that process starts? Sharni?
As babies?
Correct. Okay. So we start at birth. Some would even argue that we start when we're still inside, when we're in the womb. Okay. And what is the first sense that helps us to learn the world around us, to learn the language around us? What sense do we use? Most of us. Andrew, if you'd like to weigh in, you can certainly use a microphone. Okay, Joe, and I'm going to I would like everybody to participate, not just, although I love to hear from Joe and Sharni, I still would like to have everybody involved, please. So let's go to Joe and then Nirvana.
I think we use our sense of hearing, but also our sense of sight when we're first learning, and also touch. I think babies are multisensory when they're trying to acquire language.
Okay, thank you. And Nirvana? I'll unmute you. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. I agree with Joe. I think as babies, sight and we use our hearing and our touch as well, because as a baby you can't really do much, and so that's how you pick up, that's how babies can recognize their parents. The sound of their mother's voice comforts them. So
Very good. Okay. All right, thank you. All right. I was just offering a little technical help for the other Dr. Allgood here online. Okay. Okay, so what I heard you say was we use our hearing, right? We use our physical bodies, the tactile sensation, the touching, when our parents hold us, okay? We, right? And what else? Children are not quite able to see when they're first born. If you ever notice you're around infants, their eyes don't really focus on things. The sight actually doesn't kick in right away. Everything is quite blurry in the beginning. So they might recognize their mothers by smell and basic images or the sound of her voice more than they recognize or can distinguish her from anyone else in the house, So it's not the sense of sight that really starts the communication process, but it is much more the sense of hearing, okay? The sounds that we hear get filtered through our brain, and we start to connect certain words with certain objects or certain people, and they connect to each other, and the brain kind of makes sense of this. And after all of that processing, after all of those words that are being learned in the brain, all of those images and sounds that are being connected in the brain After months of hearing these sounds over and over again, after months of learning at a very rapid pace what those sounds are connected to and what they mean, and the concepts and the actions that they mean, only then, after months and months of intense learning, does the child actually start to utter or communicate a word or two. Think about that. How much has to go in the ears before it comes out the mouth? So hearing is very connected to speaking. Okay? But there are other ways of communicating, right? What are some of those other ways of communicating? Okay? We learn ideas through reading, right? Literacy, right? Think about how much of your education is involved in reading stuff. You're reading stuff right now. So that other communication of reading and then transmitting written words, which is writing, those are two other communication skills. So we have 4 communication skills. Okay. So let's get back to the first 2, the hearing and the speaking. Okay. Along with listening, you told me that infants are learning through touch, right? They're also learning through smell. Infants are very, very sensitive to smells. They smell people. They know what their brother smells like. They know what their father smells like. They know what the cat smells like, right? But somewhere along the line, we're taught that not to use our sense of smell, not to use our, it's called olfactory, not to use our smell with other people, because people don't like other people to smell them. It's too familiar, right? So it's a cultural thing that teaches us not to use our smell as much. And we start to rely more on our vision, on our sight. What other sense do we use as an infant? How many of you have been around infants recently? I think there's some chatting going on in the chat box. Sharni?
I was going to
Sharni,
say, is it on?
Yes.
Very recently I've been around infants, but they use their mouth, their taste.
Correct, right? So you'll notice that infants want to taste everything as well as smell everything. In fact, everything goes into their mouth. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted on the chat box. But at some point, usually mommy or daddy tells them, no, don't put that in your mouth. It's dirty. Don't put that in your mouth. You'll choke on it. You'll swallow. It's dangerous. So again, we're taught not to use our sense of taste to learn the world around us, which limits us to our sense of hearing, our sense of sight, right? And our hands, our sense of touch. Not our whole body, not like when we're a baby and our whole body is involved in learning, the tactile whole body, the kinesthetic part, but we're limited just to our hands. So as we get older and we want to learn more, we start to use fewer senses to learn. And when those senses aren't available, such as the sense of hearing, our other senses get even more heightened. Our eyes and our hands work extremely hard to compensate for the sense that we don't have. It's a hard process. Communication is a hard process. But this is how generally it happens. This is how we acquire language. Now, let's talk about acquiring American English language and why that is especially difficult. English is a crazy language. Would everybody agree that English is a crazy language? Put a check or an X if you agree or disagree with that statement. Put a check or an X next to your name, everyone. Priska, Natalie, Sarah? Priska, are you there? Okay. So most of you agree that English is a crazy language. Why? What makes English a crazy language? Therefore, a very difficult language to learn if you are not raised with it, if you are not learning it from birth, if you are not learning it from your parents, or especially if you don't have all of your senses available to learn it. What makes English a crazy language? Okay, Nirvana, I believe that English is a second language for you, correct?
No, it's my first language.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
But would you still like to answer the question and tell me why you think English is a crazy language?
I think it's just a lot of different rules, grammatical rules, and so for someone that speaks Spanish, for example, it's very different than their language. Things are, I believe we say things backwards than they say in Spanish, if I'm correct. So I think there's just a lot of rules and it can get a bit confusing.
Okay, thank you. So let me key off of that, Nirvana. And so if you feel that English has a lot of rules and that perhaps the word order is different from, say, Spanish to English, okay? It's true. So, you know, the rules could be different and the word order can be different. The sentence structure can be different. But let's just focus not on other languages and compared to English, but what makes English crazy. And when you say it has a lot of rules, can you count on all the English rules? Are they always consistent? How reliable are English grammar rules? Can you always count on the rules? Anyone? Okay. Is there anyone who learned English as a second language? Is there anyone in the class? Okay. Let me see if that's a chat or a, no? Everybody here learned English as their first language, right? Okay. So one of the things that makes English difficult is that, yes, it has a lot of rules, but it also has a lot of exceptions to those rules. In fact, there are probably more exceptions to the rules, times when the rules don't work, than there are rules that are consistent. For example, when spelling, always put an I before an E, except after a C. That exception, right, tells you that I does not always go before E. Right? And so when you are learning a language that has a very unreliable grammar system, it makes it really hard. Moreover, the English language has a lot of phonetic differences, sound variations. So for the same 26 letters, depending on the combination of how you put them together, there might be 400 different ways to sound the same combination of letters. There's no consistency in pronunciation, right? And there are differences in the dialect. Dialect is more than just accent, more than just pronunciation. But different parts of the country will speak the same American English, but it will sound very different because of the structure that they use, the word choices, the regional sound variations. Calling the same item in New York a water fountain, but in Rhode Island it's called a bubbler. So these things further complicate and make English a crazy language. Not to mention that, as I said before, there are so many non-English words and structures that have been assimilated into the American English language. And here's another example of what makes English, American English, a crazy language. When this country was founded and English became the language, the preferred language for people to speak the unified language of the country. The founding parents who were in charge of setting up the structure of the country decided that they were not going to allow English to be restrained. They were not going to allow American English to become too many rules. In other words, they wanted English to represent the society, free. They wanted the language to be free, to develop and reflect the free country that it stood for. So English was allowed to grow wild. English became a vibrant reflection of this vibrant culture. And it changed, and it moved. And words and phrases go in and go out. And it's very informal because this country, this culture tends to be on the informal side, especially when you compare it to, say, Great Britain. And you see there how British English is much more formal, much more structured when you compare it to American English. So we have all of these idiomatic expressions that are very common in English communication. Let's chew the fat. I'm all ears. Okay, now you're talking my language. And this is just 3 of perhaps hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of idiomatic expressions that American English speakers know, learn, and understand from birth. But try to explain the literal meaning of let's chew the fat to someone from speaking a language that doesn't have any corresponding idiom. Let's chew the fat literally means chewing a piece of fatty meat. But what it really means is let's talk. Let's have a conversation together. Let's discuss. So when teaching students whose first language isn't American English, the teacher must be very aware and careful about using idioms. And when he or she does, be careful to explain them what they really mean. Teach them. Right? What does the idiom "I'm all ears" mean? When someone says, "I'm all ears." Brandon, would you tell us what that means?
Hello.
Hi, Brandon.
Please.
Go ahead. Your mic is on.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Certainly. I'm asking you to explain the idiom, "I'm all ears." What does that mean?
Pretty much just that when you have someone's full attention, it's another way of saying I'm all ears. It's not that you're literally all ears. so that you have the full undivided attention.
Right, right, right. You have my attention. I'm listening. You have my attention. Good. Okay. Thank you, Brandon. And, okay, when someone says, okay, now you're talking my language, Sarah? Sarah Natalie? What does that mean? Okay, now you're talking my language.
I think it's just an idiom for, I'm trying to think of how to put it into words. Like they get the same idea that you do.
Right. I get it. I agree with you. Exactly. I agree with you. Now I'm in agreement with you. You're talking my language. That's what I want to hear. That's what I want to hear. Right on, you know. Okay. Good. So it could be fun. I mean, when you think about these things, but the language teacher has to be very aware that, and here's something that I wrote a few years ago, that language gives culture its voice. Language is the voice of culture. So let's talk now about the challenges of language diversity, okay, in our society and in our schools. How does linguistic imperialism impact communication in our society? So we have to start to think about what is linguistic imperialism. And the next slide will give you the definition. But how does linguistic imperialism impact communication in our society? The second bullet. What is Anglocentrism? And how does it affect people who speak other languages and or speak English with alternate dialects or accents? So the next concept is Anglocentrism. Okay. Anglo, I told you before, means English, English speaking. So this concept of Anglocentrism implies that English is the central language in the United States. But remember, the ism at the end of the word implies that there's a power to it. So it's not only that English is central to the United States, that it's perceived as better than non-English languages. It has more power. People who speak English tend to have more power and privilege and access to opportunities than people who do not. So English has power. The language has power. And the people who speak that powerful language have more power. So there's a power differential in this country, not only associated with race, not only associated with gender, but also associated with the language one speaks. And the third bullet, how do Anglo-centric attitudes impact students who have communication differences? What problems arise for students with non-standard English? And the last bullet, how do language biases and stigmas affect status and self-worth? So let me explain what I mean by language biases and stigmas. even among English speakers, the way that English is being spoken, the dialect or the accent one uses to speak English can be seen as high status or low status. In other words, the way a person sounds will impact how other people judge the person who's speaking. Assumptions get made by the way people speak. So let me give you a real-life example. Okay, Jared Kushner, who is the president's main advisor, and his son-in-law, was well known for never having his voice heard. He never gave speeches, and so no one in the country really knew what he sounded like until a couple of weeks ago when he made his first televised speech. And when people heard his voice for the first time, many people made fun of him because they didn't expect him to have a relatively high-pitched sound. He's a man after all. But when he spoke with a high pitch, more associated with a female voice. And so there was a lot of judgment being made about him based on his speech. Another example, okay. I am a New Yorker. I am a New Yorker. I was born and raised in Manhattan, New York City. I'm a proud New Yorker. And as a New Yorker, I have a New York accent. Now, a New York accent is very often thought of as, well, rather than answering it, let me ask you. When you hear someone who speaks with a New York accent and says things like Toity-toid and Doid Street, that's going to be a hard one to interpret. I'm trying to get the sound Doity-toid and Doid Street. Really harsh, Doity-toid and Doid. What is the impression that people have of New Yorkers based on the way they speak? In other words, what are some of the stereotypes made about New Yorkers and the way New Yorkers speak? Priska? Or would you like to raise your hand if you'd like to answer the question? Priska, would you care to share your thoughts? Priska, would you like to share your thoughts? Priska, are you there? Priska. Okay. Let's see. How about Sarah? Sarah Chu? What do you think of New Yorkers based on how they sound? Or what have you heard about New Yorkers based on what they sound?
Geez, that's a difficult one. They just have a very distinguished accent. I
Distinguished
think
in a
that
positive way or a negative
no, definitely not in a positive way. I think people
Okay.
just think of them as uneducated people,
way? Okay. So the
and that's not my
stereotype,
opinion.
I understand. No, I didn't mean to phrase it as your opinion. But there is an attitude, a stereotype out there that they are perhaps uneducated or are seen in a negative way based on the way they speak. Go ahead.
Just ignorant, closed-minded, stuck in their ways.
Okay, that's an awful lot of stigma that is attached to people just by the way they sound. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your candor. Anyone else want to weigh in on stereotypes about New Yorkers? Sharni? Oh, wait, I see you have a 2 next to your hand. Let me see who's number 1. Andrea? Okay, I just activated your mic, Andrea. Your mic is on.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello, Andrea.
I can defer to Sharni if she'd rather speak.
Go ahead, I got you activated. What
okay.
Mm-hmm.
New Yorkers are often associated with brusque and unfriendly temperaments, in a rush when you compare it to the Southern accent.
Good, thank you. And Sharni, did you want to weigh in also?
Sure. They come off as being pretty much tough and like they're, I just picture like tough guys as New Yorkers.
Tough and rough. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty much what Andrea said.
Brusque and kind of rude, right? New Yorkers are often perceived as being rude people, and largely because they talk so fast. You know, they use their hands a lot. They are perceived as aggressive, forceful, right? Now, part of that is accurate because culturally, New York City is a big, urban, crowded, noisy city, right? And it's a very fast-paced city. New York, they say, never sleeps. And so the people who live in that environment tend to mimic that culture. They're fast, they're big, and they interrupt a lot. They're aggressive. Speech is aggressive because if one is timid in New York City, you'll never be able to get out of a parking space, for example. No one will let you in. It's very aggressive. So you have to be forceful. You have to be aggressive in that environment. And the speech picks that up. The New York dialect reflects the culture, not the personalities. Now, that's what happens. People associate New York people, personalities, with those traits. But it's the culture. You see, there's a difference there, where everybody who speaks a certain way is perceived to be rude. That's just not true. They may be rude or they may be the nicest people in the world. You can't tell or judge simply on the basis of how they communicate. We can't read in things, and we often do. Like in the nail salon, we read in that they're talking about us. And it just probably isn't true. So communication breakdowns cause some of these types of interpersonal conflicts. And when people are judged by the way they sound, it carries a personal effect on their self-esteem. So if people are judged as being unintelligent, not intelligent, because they may have a Southern accent, that affects how people feel about themselves. And we all know Education 101 tells us that student self-esteem is the most important thing for student learning to occur. So we need to think about how our students treat each other based on their racial differences, based on their gender differences, and based on their language differences. This is part of the mix of diversity, a big part, an important part of diversity. Okay. So, this slide will tell you about what the concept of linguistic imperialism is. So, Andrea, can I call on you to read this quote, please? Oh, she stepped away from the session. Sorry. My daughter Andrea has a 6-month-old daughter, my granddaughter, that she's probably tending to, so we'll forgive her. And I think Ashley has stepped away as well. It looks like she has a cup of coffee. She went to get a cup of coffee. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Rebecca, you have your hand up. Would you like to weigh in? Your mic is on now, Rebecca. Becky, did you want to say something? Okay, Andrea? Okay, hang on a second. I'm just wrestling with the mic. Andrea, did you want to? Okay, I just activated your mic. Sorry.
A person's native language, in essence, defines who that person is, from what culture that person comes, and the mental and spiritual framework that person uses to perceive the world in which he or she lives. When people lose their language, especially through force, they lose a critical part of themselves. When a person is degraded because of his or her language, dialect, or accent, it is a degradation of the whole person. That was Margaret Ridgway and Cornell Tawilardi.
Thank you. Okay. So let's close your mic again, Andrea, if we could.
I don't know.
I don't. I lost your mic somehow. I don't know what happened there. Oh, there we go. Okay, got it. Okay. Seems like you're on two computers. Okay. So this concept of linguistic imperialism means that the language gets conquered. So when the Europeans came to this country for the first time, the native speakers were using various different Aboriginal languages. And the Europeans came with a variety of languages like Spanish and French and Portuguese and German and English. And eventually there was a type of conquering of all other languages, and English became the dominant language. Not the official language, but the dominant language in the country. What's the difference between an official language and a dominant language? Who would like to try to tell us the difference between an official language and a dominant language? Please raise your hand if you would like to answer that question. Sharni?
An official language could be considered something that's handed down from generation to generation, or perhaps maybe something that was put into, like, say, from the old ancestors. A dominant language is something that's been brought on and people have caught on to, say, with a lot more slangs and more of, like, into being involved in cultural aspects, I guess, and seeing what's, like, more around them as opposed to the Queen's English, so to speak.
Okay.
A little bit more lax.
Okay. Okay. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else have an idea of what the difference between an official language and a dominant language is? Andrea?
Well, like you were saying earlier, when the Founding Fathers were talking about what language is going to be the official language of the country, they didn't designate one because they didn't want to, how did you put it, limit, define in that way. So the official language of the United States there is no official language of the United States. Technically, English isn't a government-sponsored language the way that it would be in France, or French is the official language, or Canada, where English and French are both official languages. But the official language would be the official state language, the national language of a country. The dominant language, however, would be the one that has the most status, the one that most people will associate with, perhaps the one that most people speak.
Good. Well done. Okay. At some point, I'm going to want to see the baby, so you're going to have to turn on your camera, but we'll wait till the end so we can all see the baby. I heard her weighing in there. Okay. So good. Andrea said, the official language has to do with the legal language, the law. And in this country, when we look at our law, we look at the Constitution. And the First Amendment in the Constitution refers to language, right? It says that every person in this country has the freedom of speech. However, it doesn't say that it is the freedom of speech in English only. There's no language mentioned. Therefore, there's no official language in this country. We're free to speak any language that we choose to speak. That's what freedom of speech means, right? However, arguably, English is the dominant language. It is the language that most people use, that most people do business in, learn in. It is the societal language that's used by the majority of people. Okay, so that's a difference. Now, it became the dominant language because of linguistic imperialism. These other languages became secondary or devalued, and English was put in their place. So Native people were sent to American schools where they were not allowed to communicate in their languages anymore. They had to only use English or they would be punished. That's an example of linguistic imperialism. Okay. Now, today we're not in the business of punishing people for not speaking English, or we shouldn't be, right? It kind of goes against our values of freedom of speech, for one. So this is an important thing to understand from a historical look and also in regard to classroom teaching. Okay, now when we talk about languages, all languages have very similar functions. Again, I want you to appreciate the enormity and the importance of language, of communication. All languages, if they're functioning well, express and share. Languages direct and control. Words do this kind of thing. Words help us to acquire and transmit. Words help us to create and imagine. Words can reveal, can show things, or conceal, hide things. And words are also used to perform formalities. Okay? But different languages may choose different ways to function. And so what we're going to do today, and I'm very excited about this, is compare languages and culture from deaf culture and from hearing culture so that we can learn about this particular language diversity. So again, verbal is the part of language that we tend to learn through hearing and speaking, and then the area of reading and writing, which are more difficult skills, which usually are acquired later. They often take 5 to 8 years to develop reading and writing skills, and they're just harder. Writing is the hardest of the communication skills. And I know you will agree with me because you all have a research paper ahead of you, and I'm sure that it's a little bit of a weighty task that you know that you have to perform, academic writing. So again, language is both verbal and nonverbal, and sometimes they say the nonverbal communication communicates more than the verbal. Languages connect and isolate people from each other. They can do either of those things. Words themselves are powerful. We began to have that discussion comparing words like slave and enslave and murder and kill. And words themselves carry powerful imagery and messages. Words create visual images that endure, that last, and move people for both good and evil purposes. Words often lead to actions. Words transmit history, culture, wisdom, and prejudices. Words impart accurate and or inaccurate information. Words generate trust and or fear. And words can both heal and or wound. Any questions? Anybody move to share a thought that they have? Anything rising up in you that you would like to share with the class? Okay. Andrea?
this is just a little, if anybody is interested in languages like this and wants to talk with other people from other languages, there is an app that I play on. It's called Hi Native. That's one word, H-I-N-A-T-I-V-E.
Slow down, Andrea, a little bit. You talk faster than I could think.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's an app that connects people who speak all different languages to ask questions about how to speak in other languages. For example, last night I was speaking with people who speak German and Japanese and Korean who were asking questions about how to speak American English. Like, what is the difference between on and in? Why are you in a car and on a bus? And you can answer that question. Or they can ask deeper questions about how American English functions in society, and you can answer them. Additionally, you can speak, if you're practicing your, say, Spanish, you can record up to 10 seconds and say, how does this sound? And native Spanish speakers will comment back to you. It's just a fun way to play language, and you can ask specific questions about different languages. And it's been very interesting culturally for me, just because someone asked a phrase, what does it mean to call into question? Why does that mean to diminish, call into question? Doesn't that just mean just asking questions? And, you know, finding out how to answer that question was really kind of interesting.
Good, thank you. Can you write the name of the app in the chat box for us, please?
Of course.
Thank you. Okay, let me, again, I'm hearing lots of bells and whistles, and I don't know, I don't know what they are. Okay, so now we're going to start getting into, you know, some useful things for the teacher, for the practitioner to learn. And one of the readings that you've been asked to do has to do with different kinds of communication patterns involved with different ethnic groups and their cultural tendencies. I already described the New York cultural verb communication pattern to you, but the research has shown that that there are different verbal patterns and kind of rules and all of these things cross-culturally. How much animation, how much emotion is shown in the communication pattern. How much directness or indirectness. And this is one we're going to do today when we compared deaf culture to hearing culture. So, you know, when you learn about deaf culture, you'll find that deaf people will be much more direct than hearing people. They'll say exactly visually what they're seeing about you. So if and that's common and that's not rude. So example, if someone two friends are talking, say, "Oh, you look like you gained weight," you know, that isn't necessarily that's not an insult. But in the hearing culture, we tend to be less direct than that. We tend to kind of not always tell people exactly what we're thinking. We cover it up, we conceal in hearing culture. So that's a cultural difference I wanted you to be aware of. And understanding the cultural differences, the patterns, the gestures, the ways cultures use silence and take turns, can really help us understand each other cross-culturally. Let me give you another example from this list. And I'm referring to silences and turn-taking. And the difference is not with a cultural group, with a gender group. I'm going to compare men and women in terms of their communication pattern. So when two men are having a conversation with each other, and they're friends, and they're having just a conversation, they tend to take turns. Men will talk for as long as they feel like talking, and the other man will just listen. And when man number one is finished, then man number two has the floor. It's man number two's turn, and he gets to talk for as long as he wants. Okay? And it goes back and forth. They have very strict turn-taking kind of practice in male-to-male conversation. Now, women are different. Women, when we talk to each other, female to female, friend to friend, we tend to finish each other's sentences. We jump back and forth. We interrupt each other. We like to go on tangents. We ask other questions. Back and forth, rapid fire pace. You with me, girls? You with me, ladies? You know what I'm talking about? Okay? And that's comfortable for most women. We like it that way. However, when you put a man and a woman together to have a conversation, here's where we start to run into big problems. Once the man starts talking and the woman jumps in to finish his sentence or ask a question or to give an alternate information of some sort, the man gets a little bit huffy and says, I'm not finished talking yet. Wait a minute. You're interrupting me, he thinks. And the woman is thinking, well, you never give me a chance to say anything. You just keep talking and talking and talking, and you don't let me get a word in. And so we have a communication breakdown, a very common communication breakdown between men and women, only based on this one area of taking turns. So I found this to be extremely helpful in my relationship with my husband. This helped me enormously communicating with my husband, just understanding this pattern. I hope it helps you too. But there are certain kinds of etiquette we find that when talking with deaf people, having a conversation with deaf people. Most hearing people don't know how to communicate with deaf people. Most of us walk around and we don't know any form of sign language, right? And so that's very isolating. We're isolated from each other. And the goal, of course, in education and in a healthy society is to communicate across the differences, through the differences. So the more we learn about the other cultures, the better equipped we are to communicate with people who communicate differently. That's it, in a nutshell. It requires quite a bit of learning on the part of the teacher to be able to do this. But that's what makes you a multicultural teacher. So again, with this area of cross-cultural communication, we see different kinds of verbal patterns, different kinds of discussion patterns, different grammar, different word choices. And there can be breakdowns or understanding on each of these communication variables. The nonverbal cues can be very confusing. Leaning in, leaning towards someone, leaning away from someone can be perceived in very different ways. How we touch, haptics, where we touch, do we not touch, also sends cues to people. And finally, I'm going to talk about this intellectual pattern, the way we think. And this I find to be very interesting and helpful. And again, the required reading will help you with this. Generally speaking, when two English speakers, two Anglo-Americans speak to each other, the pattern is very much like it shows there, a straight arrow. We tend to be very direct in our words. We want the response to be very direct back to us. Short and sweet, right to the point. Hit the nail on the head. Especially in a classroom where there could be 30 students and one teacher. Teachers tend to be very comfortable with short, direct answers from their students, right? Because there's a lot of people to teach. So when you have students from different cultures and with different communication patterns, say, for example, a Chinese student or a Japanese student or a Korean student, these cultures tend to have a different communication pattern, which tends to be more circular than direct, as I just described, Anglo-American speech. So the Asian student, Chinese student, or the Japanese student, when a teacher asks them a question, may tend to give a very full, non-direct answer, but very broad, very extensive. And because the teacher might assume that the Asian student is smart, very often could cut that student off because it takes a lot of time to give that kind of answer, and say, yep, you got it, good, let's go on. And make the assumption that the student knows what he's talking about. That works to the advantage of Asian students. The idea or the stereotype that Asian students are smart helps them in this way. It's an advantage, you see? But when you have students who come from Romance languages, which, for example, Spanish, Portuguese, or French, these languages tend to be more poetic and detailed in their communication patterns. So, for example, when a teacher asks a question and a Hispanic student, a Spanish-speaking student, attempts to answer the question, it may sound something like this. Oh, I see, teacher. Let me give you an example. I know what you mean. I have a friend who has a friend whose sister knows somebody that lives in that neighborhood that you're asking about. And my Aunt Tilly told me that she thinks that the neighborhood school there is better than this school. So the teacher who's listening to this tangent, what she feels is a tangent, might say to the student, no, you don't understand what I'm asking you. Let me ask the question again. And the teacher may rephrase the question. And then the student again will give an example or tell a story that is related to it, but it's not quite hitting the nail on the head for the teacher. And so the teacher might say, go do your homework again, you don't understand. Make an assumption that the student is not giving the direct answer, therefore the student does not know. But the reality is that sometimes these romantic and poetic and detailed answers are very creative and very rich. If given enough time, the student would get there, but the teacher doesn't know that the student is heading in that direction, as those arrows imply. So understanding the languages of your students is important, but also understanding the cultural backgrounds of your students is important. Okay. Is there a problem with the monitor interpreter? Oh, okay.
I just heard something, so I just wanted to see if somebody was trying to tell me something.
Oh, okay.
Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, the visual is a little bit on and off. It's not very smooth. Ashley, are you able to see the monitor clearly? Good. Okay, thank you, Ashley. Okay. All right, so let's do one of two case studies now. I have two in this. Is there anyone who has Spanish as their first language? And I'm asking for a reader who has Spanish as a first language because there are some Spanish words that I'd like to be pronounced correctly. No one in the class has Spanish as a first language? Sarah. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Would you mind reading for us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. What am I reading exactly? What's on the board here?
Yes, please, the case study.
Okay. Miss Harris is a first-year teacher in a middle-class public school in an urban area. She teaches a diverse group of fifth graders. On Friday, she has scheduled a science test, and she is allowing her students to study for the exam during class time. She has the students choose a partner to study with. Juanita and Maria are both from families where their parents speak Spanish at home, and they partner up with each other. Seated next to them are Matt and Sam. A lively buzz of conversation takes over the classroom. After a while, as Miss Harris begins to make her way around the class, Matthew approaches her and complains that the Spanish girls are annoying him because they are talking in Spanish and not doing their work. Miss Harris doesn't understand Spanish herself.
Good. Thank you very much. Okay. So now I'd like to hear from you by raising your hand, if you would, to identify one underlying problem that's occurring in this classroom. You can also use the chat box for this activity, but I'd like everybody to be involved. All right, let's see. Brandon?
I want to identify one of the underlying issues is that Matthew and Miss Harris, they don't speak Spanish, so they really can't decide if they're doing their work or not. You would just have to pretty much assume that they're being responsible with the time they're given.
Okay, so Brandon, while I have you on there, whose job is it to see that the students are doing their assignment?
Well, the teachers, but all Miss Harris would have to do is just go over there, and I assume they're bilingual, and you could see based on what's on their desk if they're doing their work or not.
Good, I understand, but before we get to solutions or what teachers need to do, let's be sure that we're really clear on what the underlying problems are. So one of the things that I heard you say is that the teacher and the boys don't understand Spanish, and there's a possibility that the girls are not on task. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep going with some underlying issues or problems. Sarah? Well, Do I have to turn on the mics? You can't turn on your own mic, Sarah? Okay. I guess I have it locked somehow.
Yeah.
Okay, Sarah. Okay.
I think one of the underlying issues is the language barrier and the fact that the teacher doesn't understand it herself, so she technically doesn't know if the students are on task or not.
She doesn't know if the students are on task or not. Okay. And there's a language barrier there. So it's the teacher's job to know if the students are on task or not. And the teacher doesn't know, right? And you're saying the teacher doesn't know because she has a language barrier. Is that accurate, Sarah? Sarah? Okay. Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in? Sarah has stepped away for a second, I think. Nirvana?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think the underlying issue is that Matthew is assuming that the girls are just being disruptive and they're annoying him because they're speaking in Spanish. I'm sure the other students are probably speaking in English, doing their work, but he is bothered by this because they're speaking in Spanish from the way that it's worded.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what is Matthew doing with this information, with his feelings about being bothered by the girls speaking Spanish? What is his action or behavior in this case?
He's complaining to the teacher.
Okay. He's complaining to the teacher. Okay. So what do we call? What's another word for that when one kid complains about another kid to the teacher?
Tattletaling?
Tattletaling, right. Yeah. Okay. So he's tattletaling. He's complaining to the teacher. And while he's up at the teacher's desk complaining about the girls not doing their work, is he doing his work? Or is he off task? Nirvana?
Well, if he's taking the time to go up and speak to the teacher, he's not doing his work at the moment.
So while he's tattletaling, right? While he's tattletaling, he's not doing his work. Good. Okay. So let's talk about some, now we'll move into some solutions, right? Brandon mentioned one earlier. Would you like to offer a solution at this point, Brandon? Or rephrase the one that you had cited before?
With them not understanding the Spanish?
Yeah, what should the teacher do with this information that, you know, that we just talked about?
I would just get Matthew back to focusing on his own work, and then would just go over there to the Juanita and Maria, and you could see like the physical work that they're doing themselves. See if they're on task or not.
Okay. I really like that you said you'd get Matthew back on task first, because he's the one that you're sure is not on task, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, good. Okay, I thought I saw another hand up, but it went down. Maybe you're writing in the chat box, but I'm not monitoring the chat box at the moment. Okay, so so you feel that the teacher should verify that the girls are on task, because they're supposed to be doing something, and you want to find out they're doing it. What else needs to happen? What else does the teacher need to do? Joe? Oh, wait a minute. Joe, now your mic's on.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. I think Ms. Harris needs to talk to Matthew about why he has a problem with the girls speaking in Spanish and what his concerns are about that, and possibly telling him that that's not a problem if the girls are doing their work. and it's really not his business, that he should really, you know, in a nice way, be focused on what he's doing. But I would want to find out why he feels like, because they're speaking in a different language, why he feels that they're not doing their work and why they're messing around and why he feels negatively towards it. And maybe try to put a positive, you know, help him understand that that's not the best way to think.
Okay, good. That's a good response. Now, while your mic is active, let me just probe a little bit more with you. Do you know why Matthew is tattletaling? Do you know the reason that the girl speaking Spanish is bothering him?
I can make assumptions, but I do not know, so that's why I would ask him.
Okay. What would your assumption be?
My assumption would be that there's something a way he was brought up that maybe parents feel like, you know, English is the language and it should be spoken only, and you know, just a narrow way of thinking.
Okay.
That would be my assumption, or that maybe he feels insecure and maybe he feels like they're talking about him and he doesn't feel comfortable.
Okay, so good. So what I'm hearing you say, and I think your assumption is accurate, is that he has adopted an attitude of Anglocentrism, which says that only English should be spoken in the classroom, and that if someone is not speaking English, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it bothers him. Would you agree with that or disagree with that? Joe, your hand is up. Did you want to respond to that question, or was that up from before? I think Shani is agreeing, right? Okay. So this child has kind of learned some of this Anglocentrism that's in our culture. And you know, it may have been reinforced in his home, but the reality is that our culture teaches this. It's not just individual parents who teach this. That generally people are uncomfortable when other people are speaking in languages they don't understand. It makes people feel uncomfortable because they're in a position of not understanding, not having the power to understand. But it's that lack of power that students who don't speak English as their first language feel most of the time, because they're struggling with the communication almost all the time. But the English speakers struggle with it perhaps in a scenario like this. Okay. Other thoughts or other thoughts on this particular case that you would like to share? All thoughts are welcome. No wrong answers here. Okay. Ashley, are you here? Because you seem to have a cup of coffee. I don't know if you're here or not. Ashley, are you here?
Yeah, I just got back.
Okay, good. Welcome back. Okay. So everything is being recorded. So anything that you miss, anything that anybody misses, they'll be able to go back and review this recorded session, and it will be closed captioned. Okay. All right, so let's move on a little bit. Just need to find my place here. Okay. Now is the time where I'm going to let you watch a short video. Let me just give you the link. Hold on a second here. Okay. So what I'd like you to do is open up another tab and take that link, copy and paste it into the tab. It's just a 6-minute video that I'd like you to view. And when you come back, I'd like you to think about it and be ready to share one new concept that you learned about deaf culture from watching the video. These other ones you can watch at your leisure at any other time, but I'm just asking you to watch the one that's in the chat box right now. Any questions on what to do? Okay, so everyone. Interpreter, your mic's on, just so we can hear. Okay, when you finish watching the video and come back, put a check next to your name, please. Thank you, Brandon. Okay, ladies, please put a check next to your name when you finish watching the video. Thank you. Okay. Just waiting for Joe. And Joe, have you watched the video? Okay. Great. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to think about one thing that you learned, a new concept about deaf culture. But before we do that, there was one other thing. I want to go back a minute to the case study that I actually didn't finish processing with you. So in this situation, the teacher's responsibility is to know that all the students are on task and learning what they need to know to be able to take the science test, right? And assuming that there's nothing wrong with the way that she has them set up, and they can pick their partners and do their prep work in any language that they feel comfortable in. That's kind of a basic assumption, that it's not that the girls are speaking Spanish that's the problem, because the subject here is science, right? So by insisting that the girls use English all the time may not be an asset in helping them prepare for the science test. There's a faulty assumption that that somehow when you use a non-English language, that it inhibits or gets in the way of your learning English. But that's just not true. Research just proves that. The way the brain works when it's learning language is that it stores the information, the language, in a very a spot of your brain called the language center. And it has an enormous capacity for understanding and learning language. If you were to feed your brain 5 languages, you would be able to learn 5 languages simultaneously. Your brain has the capacity to compartmentalize those different languages. People can be multilingual. Just because most of the people in this country aren't multilingual doesn't mean that we don't have the capacity to be multilingual. And the way you become multilingual or bilingual is by learning and using 2 languages, 2 or more languages. So it doesn't slow down the learning of English if you are communicating in another language that's comfortable for you. Given that rich content, you would be able to learn science in either language. So having said that, and there's a lot to it. You'll learn more when you take your TESOL classes about how language learning is done and so forth. But getting back to this classroom scenario, if we make the assumption that it's not a problem that the girls are speaking Spanish, that's okay, and that the teacher needs to check for understanding, that the teacher needs to be able to find out what the girls know in whatever way that the teacher can get that information. But more than that, the teacher needs to know that all the students are on task, learning and studying for the science test, not just the girls, right? To assume that just the girls are the ones who are slacking off is problematic in that they are being penalized for speaking in Spanish and thinking in Spanish. And that's not what we want to do, right? But we do want to ensure that they're learning science and that all the children in the class are learning science, and therefore go around to all of the students to find out if they need any help or if they're ready to take the test. And the girls would just be included in that class assessment. Does that make sense? Okay. I just wanted to close the loop on that because I moved past it. Andrea, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I enjoyed your case study. The baby needs a nap, so I wanted to just very quickly sign out.
Well, before you do, you're going to have to turn on your video cam so we can see her.
Just did.
Okay, let's see.
Hi.
I don't see you.
I see me.
I see you? Does anybody see Andrea? I see you sending video, but it's not coming through. Does anybody see the video? No, we don't see it.
No?
Andrea. No.
I'm sending video. I can see me. How do I make it so you can see me? Do you have to allow the video to come through?
I don't know. Just shut it off and click it on again, and then we'll.
All right. It's
we'll
off. And it's starting. It's thinking about it.
Yeah, you're still kind of not transmitting yet, but. Oh, well.
One more try. I see me again. No one sees me? No one sees this adorable little baby face?
No. Nope.
She's learning 3 languages, just to talk about that. She's being raised trilingual, aren't you?
Oh, cool. Very cool.
All right. Ariana is signing off.
Okay. Have a good nap.
I apologize for disruption. Take care now.
No problem. Bye now. All right. So let's get back to the video that you just watched. And I'd like you to raise your hand and let me know one thing that you learned, one new concept that you learned about deaf culture just from watching that video. Or from personal experience. Certainly, Ashley, you are welcome to contribute. Okay, I see hands up now. We'll go to Sharni first, and then Sarah, and then Sarah. Go ahead, Sharni, your microphone's on.
They're very accepting to one another. They don't pass judgment.
Okay, good. accepting, non-judgmental. Good. And Sarah?
I didn't realize that it was so much their own culture, and I didn't realize how different it was to our culture.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you. And Sarah, with the H?
So I worked at a funeral home for many years, and I did attend many funerals. And what I did notice about someone who passed away who was from the deaf community, you know, everyone there was pretty much deaf, and they just seemed like such a tight-knit community, and very eager to socialize, very eager to sign to each other and talk to each other. And I think compared to hearing people, I agree with all the opinions said in the video. They just seemed to like a family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Anyone else? So I watched a ton of videos all weekend, and the one that I would highly recommend for you is that second one that's listed there, protecting and protecting. Something's wrong. Protecting and interpreting deaf culture. It's 16 minutes, but it's really, really good. It gives you also some background into the history of deaf culture and ASL, American Sign Language, and all the different diversities among deaf people, and it's really very interesting for those of us hearing people to learn about. So, is there anything else that Ashley? Is there anything that that I'm leaving out that perhaps you feel is important to share about deaf community? Your microphone's on.
Hello?
Hi.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Well, in Broward College, I was once in the ASL club, and our goal was to take the hearing culture and the deaf culture and put the two together. It doesn't matter if you need no sign language or anything. We wanted to teach about the awareness and be accepted. So, yeah, the video explains it all. Definitely right on.
Which video are you talking about, Ashley?
Yeah, that we all saw.
Oh, the one you saw?
Yeah, what we all watched.
Oh, okay.
I've seen the others, but I'm sure they're really. Am I gone?
Yes.
I've seen the other videos, and they're really great. And I hope you all watch it. It definitely talks about the deaf culture and our history of ASL, how we all interact.
Mm-hmm. Good. Is there another one that you would recommend that is not listed here?
I saw one video from TED Talk. I forgot her name though.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you guys. It's from TED Talk. It's just great. Have you heard of it?
Yes. One of these is that TED Talk video. I think it might be the second or the third bullet.
With the woman, I don't know. Blonde hair.
Yes, I saw that one. It's one of these. I think it's the second bullet.
Second one.
The second bullet, I think, is the TED Talk.
She talks about her life, I think, and how it's like hanging out with hearing people. Like it's a ping pong match, going back and forth. You don't understand what's going on.
Yes.
Because we relive. we rely on visual. So that's why.
Thank you, Ashley. You're very eloquent. You're an excellent communicator. And we appreciate you.
Thank you. It's hard talking through here. I'm not sure if it's going through.
It is.
Okay, good.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to close her mic. Okay, so moving on now, a couple other recommended videos for you at your leisure. I found this one online yesterday, American Tongues. It speaks about American English diversity and the stigmas associated with regional and accent differences. It's about 50 minutes long, but it's really funny and really good and closed captioned. The second one is one that I would often show, but it relies on accent to get the humor of it. And one of the things about different languages, people who speak different languages, one of the things that doesn't translate really well is humor, you know, and sometimes poetry, things that have, you know, imagery or nuances are a little bit difficult to teach when students don't have the native English skills. But take a look at it and see if you get something out of it. Okay, one more case study, and then we're going to almost have just a couple more things to say, and we'll be done. Okay, so for this case study, can I have a volunteer to read? And this one, yeah, okay, we don't need a Spanish speaker for this one. A volunteer to read this one? Sarah, is that your hand up, I see? Oh, I'm sorry, I need to activate your mic, so sorry. Okay, you're active now.
Okay. Nancy Peterson is a 4th grade teacher in a large urban school district. Many of her students are from language minority homes. She has set up parent conferences over a 3-week period and has indicated to students and in notes sent home to parents that Spanish, Haitian, and Mandarin and Cantonese Chinese speaking translators will be available. Parents can request this service when making their appointments. Mr. and Mrs. Huang arrived punctually for their appointment. Ms. Peterson greets the enthusiastic parents, and they inform her that they are both enrolled in English class, and that is why they have not requested a translator. The parents are obviously supportive of their daughter's education. The problem is that while they seem to understand Peterson in the conference, Peterson is unable to understand much of what they are saying.
Good. Thank you. Well read. All right, so let us talk about the underlying issues or problems in this case. Who would like to start us off by identifying an underlying problem? Brandon?
They can understand English, but they have problems when it comes to pronouncing English.
Okay, so you're talking about the parents?
Yeah.
The parents can understand English, but they have trouble speaking or pronouncing English, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So what does their pronunciation of English, what does that lead to?
it leads to it's like through a one-way door. Like they can only understand it, but when they try to reproduce it back to the person that they're speaking to, it's just not developed to that extent yet.
Okay, so they can't communicate. Okay, so why can't? Okay, let's see how to ask this next question. Okay, let's kind of build on that. Is there anybody else wants to take it from there? Maybe identify another aspect of that problem. You know, because that focuses on the parents. Is there anyone else in this case that's having a problem? Oh, Brandon, I see your mic is still on. Did you want to weigh in anymore, or would you? No? Okay. Okay, let's see. I have to go back. Okay, Nirvana, and then Sharni. Oh, there we go.
I think that there is a barrier to their communication. So from the teacher's perspective, she's not really able to fully understand or communicate the things that she would want to communicate with them.
Who's
so
she?
The teacher won't
Okay.
be able to fully communicate clearly what she wants to discuss in that meeting with the parents. So it might not lead to a productive meeting, I feel like, because the communication's not that clear between them.
Okay. Okay, so let me kind of articulate what I'm hearing you say and pose another question. So there's a communication breakdown, and you're saying that because the parents can't articulate their thoughts, and they're also not going to understand what the teacher is articulating.
Yes.
Okay, so the parents have a problem, you're saying.
Yeah, I think that there's a problem on both sides because
on both sides.
Right,
Okay.
because there is that problem. Ms. Peterson might not feel like she's able to communicate her concerns about the student or say the things that she wants to say. So I feel like
and
it just
feel
makes
like
it difficult.
I'm sorry, I thought you were finished. I didn't mean to talk over you.
It's okay.
So you don't feel that the parents are going to understand what the teacher is saying in English?
They might be able to grasp what she's saying, but I feel like Miss Peterson might be hesitant to go in depth and say the things that she wants to say just because they're not able to clearly communicate with her, clearly respond to what she's saying. She's having a hard time understanding them.
Okay. So and let me ask this question of everyone. So who's at fault here? Who's causing the communication breakdown? Where is the onus of responsibility? Is it on the parents because they're not using English well, or is it on the teacher? Okay. Joe?
Teacher's responsibility to make
I'm sorry,
sure.
can you start again, please? Your mic wasn't on immediately.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's the teacher's responsibility. She's the one that called the meeting, so therefore I think it falls on her to make sure that she has the resources readily available. Even though the parents didn't ask for a translator, I think she could have one available for that conference time because they are available at the school, and just try to communicate to the parents that it's not them, that it's her, that she's requesting the translator to make sure that their communication is thorough and smooth and they're doing what they need to do with the student's well-being and their child in mind.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of jumping into a solution. Okay. And one thing might be, that's, we'll get there eventually. But it'd be helpful if we really dissect all what's really going on here, so that we know of all the solution choices we have, which option would be the best. So that's one possible solution. But let's see if it's going to solve all the problems. And I'm not really convinced that we have a full understanding of what the problem here is yet. So there's a communication breakdown. Okay. So you're saying that the parents are the ones who are not going to understand the teacher, and that's the problem. But I'm sorry, somebody has a mic on? I don't know who's talking. Is there someone who wants to say something? Andrea, is that you? Are you back? Okay, let me just mute her mic. It might have gotten turned on accidentally. Okay, so I didn't hear anybody say that the teacher has a problem, okay? So, you know, there's an assumption that the parents aren't understanding the teacher, but maybe the teacher isn't understanding the parents. Which one, do you think that's possible too, that the teacher is having the problem understanding the parents? Okay. So if the teacher is having the problem understanding the parents and the teacher ostensibly called the meeting, let's focus on what needs to happen here. What does the teacher need to understand the parents as well as transmit information to the parents? Well, doesn't the teacher need to find out from the parents how their child is doing at home in regard to school? Maybe what problems the child may be having with the homework, or his attitude or her attitude at home about certain subjects. Isn't there important information that the teacher would need to get from the parents to help their child when she's in charge in the classroom? So the communication has to be two-way, right? Now, the teacher also needs to transmit information to the parents about how their child is doing in her classroom, right? Now, the assumption is that the parents aren't going to understand the teacher. But do you remember what I said about how language progresses? We learn and we know in our brains a heck of a lot of English before we're able to speak it. The understanding and the comprehension and the brain is far advanced to what we can actually communicate in our mouth. Our thinking is much far ahead. So therefore, it is likely that the parents understand the teacher if the teacher is speaking in a clear way. If the teacher is not mumbling, talking too fast, or, you know, covering her mouth, or things that would detract from the parents comprehending her speaking English. So one of the things that teachers need to be aware of is to be, first and foremost, good communicators, right? So, and understand that the parents are there, motivated to be there, because they want very much to hear what the teacher has to say. That's why they came. So to dismiss their understanding would do them a disservice, right? So that's one angle to this scenario. So the teacher doesn't understand the parents. What about that? What language are the parents using ostensibly? Well, they're using their new language of English. They're going to school, and they're trying English in a very rudimentary way, a very simple way, because they may not have all the words at their disposal. Their grammar may be a little bit off, right? However, when you talk to people who are first learning a language, like children, you know, even if their language is very basic and you listen hard, you could understand what they're saying. You have to work at it a little bit, right? So one of the things that the teacher can do in this case is to explain to the parents that she's having trouble understanding them, not because you know, they're doing anything wrong, but to help them communicate, you know, to ask them simple questions, to learn the techniques that would get them to communicate their responses in the simplest way. Now, sometimes say, well, what about putting all this in writing? Well, writing should be part of this, but not during the verbal conversation. Writing takes a lot longer, takes a lot more thought, and it's a lot harder. Remember, writing is the last of the communication skills. So relying too heavily on writing here may be a detractor from making a successful connection with the parents during the conference. That's the goal. The parents need to leave feeling that they were heard and understood, and that they received some information and understanding from the teacher. And it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. One or two things. They leave successful, the teacher is a victory for the teacher. And then follow-up meetings can be scheduled to advance the conversation from what you learned at this first conference. Okay. So what do you think about the solution of bringing the child in to act as a translator? Do you think that would be a good solution or not a good solution? It certainly is a common solution that a lot of teachers fall to. Sharni?
Would it defeat the purpose of a parent-teacher conference, or would it be a positive aspect?
What do you think?
I think it would possibly be both.
Well, it's either positive or negative. Which one do you think it would be more?
More positive, I guess.
More helpful?
It'd be helpful for them to understand because the child is in class every day listening to English, and it would be helpful to translate what the teacher is saying. And
okay.
Then as the child can also understand what Ms. Peterson needs from her in order to improve, or if she's doing well. So I guess it'd be helpful.
Okay. All right. So what would be a downside to having the child translate? Shawnee expressed some of the upsides to it. What would be a downside? Joe? Oops.
One.
I'm sorry. Can you start again, please?
Okay. The student might not interpret everything that you want to be for the parents to know. He might omit some things that are maybe not as positive as he might want his parents to know about.
Right. So the child may make mistakes, may omit some things, maybe intentionally,
Yes.
or maybe unintentionally, right? Because the child may not understand exactly what the teacher is trying to communicate, right? So there might be some things, as we say, lost in translation, okay? Now, what language is all of this conversation through the translator going in? How would the teacher be speaking to the child? In what language? Ostensibly in English, right? And then the child turns around and translates English into English for his parents, or translates the English into Cantonese Chinese. How do you know the child even knows Cantonese Chinese, right? And if the child did translate from English to English or from English to Cantonese, how do you think the parents might feel about that? Think about it from the parent's perspective. Put yourself in the parent's place for a minute. You're working very hard in a new language, going to school, learning English. You come with a fair amount of confidence to this parent-teacher conference, and the teacher says something to the effect is, I don't understand you speaking English. Let's have your child speak English for you. Do you think that there might be any kind of downside to that? Maybe an emotional type of conflict for the parents and something like that? Remember, certain cultures have very strong cultural values on the parent relationship and the child relationship, and putting a child in this position can, in some cases, cause the parent to lose faith. And when you lose faith, that means, you know, you lose some respect. It's like losing respect. And that could very likely be a downside to this. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So the fact that this is a parent-teacher conference, I would encourage you to think that it's not usually the best solution to jump right to bringing a child in there, because for a lot of reasons, the child doesn't have a seat at the table here. The child, it may be late at night. The child should be at home and shouldn't have this type of power or responsibility. Let me say responsibility, because it's an adult responsibility that's being placed on the child. So think about that. You know, think about what happens if you bring in interpreters. While you really are anxious to make the communication happen, when you bring in an interpreter, you might be saying to the parents, your English isn't good enough, you need to speak in Cantonese, and the interpreter has to speak English for you. So it may be perceived as an insult. Even though you don't mean it that way, it could be perceived. The parents might be discouraged. So the best solution here might be for the teacher to work really hard to try to understand the parents, to make the communication happen, make this a successful parent-teacher conference, even taking perhaps some of the responsibility on herself for not having a better situation for the parents here. You don't have to, blame yourself entirely here, but professionally, you need to make this communication happen for the good of the child. Ultimately, it's about the child's success. So the quote that I'm ending with comes from Nelson Mandela. Ashley, would you read this one for us, please? I have to turn on your microphone. Your mic is on, Ashley. Would you read this for us, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
If you talk to someone in a language he or she understands, that goes to the person's head. If you talk to somebody in his or her language, that goes to the heart. That's true.
Thank you, Ashley. Okay. All right. I want you to think about how this applies to teaching, obviously. Okay. So, we have, about almost 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes, and I take attendance at the end. So I would just like to, let's see. When I call your name, let's see how I don't know how to unmute all the mics. That's the problem here. Let me just go ahead. I'm unmuting all the mics, but please don't everybody talk at once right now. I hear some background noise. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know where the background noise is coming from.
Would you mute them?
Is someone?
What?
All right. It's not going to work. Hang on a second. I mute. I'm going to ask you when I call your name, just if you have any very, very brief comment that you'd like to share with everybody about today's class, but don't make it more than 10 or 15 seconds. Very brief comments so we don't run out of time. Okay, so let me start with Becky. Let me start with Ashley. I'm going to go in the order.
I really appreciate that you included the deaf culture, but just to broaden it out, generalize it, everybody should be open to each other. Don't be scared of the language. There's so many different ways you can communicate, like writing, picture, gesture, even if you guys don't have the same languages. Just be open, not afraid.
Beautiful, Ashley. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Brandon?
I really appreciated learning a lot about the deaf community because I'm not really involved in it. It's good to learn about new communities that I previously haven't really looked at.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, and Joe?
I think, like what Brandon said, I appreciated learning about the deaf community, especially because Ashley's in our class and she's so open and we just feel closer to her, so I appreciate that.
I agree. That's a great comment. Thank you. All right, and Nirvana?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I also really appreciated learning more about the deaf community, and the video was really eye-opening, and also because of Ashley, I think it's so great that you tried to incorporate those things into our class, and it's such a great learning experience for all of us.
Indeed. Thank you. And Rebecca? Becky, I'm sorry. Becky? Okay. And then we'll go to Sarah N.
I really liked this lesson and how it was all about different communication barriers, and I think I learned a lot about not only the deaf culture, but just other cultures coming together in general.
Wonderful, thank you. And Sarah? Sarah too?
Yes, I also highly enjoyed learning about the deaf community. It's something that I've always been quite curious about and eager to learn more about. So this definitely made me want to go out there and you know, interact and learn more about their community. Also, I wanted to add, my sister Rebecca's sitting right next to me. You call her Becky, but her mic isn't working. We're at the library, and I don't know why it's just not working. She does have a mic plugged into the computer, but it doesn't work. So if you want, I can put her on mine right now, and she can give some
Sure.
feedback.
Thank you.
Right.
Hi, Professor. It's Rebecca.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so I had written it in the box, but I don't know if anyone saw it. I said that the lesson was really interesting for me because we discussed so many things that normally we don't think about, you know? So I appreciated learning about not only everything we talked about, but the deaf community as well, because personally I have very little knowledge on it, but I learned so much.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
Sharni?
Hi, I really enjoyed today's lecture about learning about communication through everything, and then especially when you brought up about the deaf community. That's very interesting to me. I did learn sign language when I was in high school, and I would like to further it because it would just make me more versatile of a person. Quick question for you. I have a quick question. You crossed out the required reading on the syllabus for summer, but I wanted to know, you still want us to get on and read it, correct?
I don't know which one required reading you're referring to. Not all of them were crossed out.
The one on Elliot.
It's not required? I crossed that one out?
Yeah.
Okay, well then it's highly suggested. How's that?
No, but I was going to say I want to read it because I find all the required readings interesting. So that was my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you, Sharni. Okay. So a couple of things I just wanted to mention. I have a special session going on Thursday at 1 o'clock. I will be going over your critical assignments, not your critical assignments, but the instructions for your critical assignments. I put an announcement out there. So if you can come at 1 o'clock, it'll be about an hour, and hopefully we'll get an interpreter there. Probably one interpreter will work for us on Thursday for a 1 hour class, 1 hour session. And I'll talk to Luciana about that. So, but the purpose is to really kind of help you, move that assignment ahead. It is due on the 7th of July, which isn't too far away. So I wanted to make sure that, if you haven't started yet, you really need to kind of get going on that. I will tape that, and you will be able to listen to a recorded session. But being there physically at 1 o'clock on Thursday, you'll be able to get personalized answers to your questions. I think it'll be very helpful for you. So do what you can between now and Thursday for that particular session. Okay. Are there any other questions? I feel like I'm forgetting something. I always feel like I'm forgetting something. I think I hope this WebEx experience has been good for you. It seems to be working without too many technical problems, which I'm thankful for. But if you want to share with me your experience on this, I can learn from how you're perceiving things, how to make it better moving forward. Okay, and I also want to thank you all for your candid openness and for allowing me to be your professor. I'm honored. So I'm going to shut the recording right now. Hang on. And if anyone wants to stay on with me, I'll still be here a few more minutes. The session doesn't close right away. Okay. Okay, just wanted you to see I'm here, everyone. Please write a quick goodbye in the chat box, and you're free to leave. Keep an eye on the announcements is all. Andrea, are you back? Interpreter, are you still there? I think Ashley might have. Oh, you are. Did Ashley get off? She already went off? Okay. Okay, bye. Thank you so much. Andrea, are you still there? Becky, are you good? Yeah, I don't see your microphone. Your microphone just disappeared. Hi, Joe. Okay, I think that's just everybody. Andrea, you there? Andrea?